Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're trying to get our heads around the core difference between the two biggest players on the world stage, the US and China.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic. They're both these massive engines for change, but as our listener sources suggest, they operate in fundamentally different ways. Thrilling, sometimes maddening, definitely bizarre at times.
Exactly. And the sources give us this really interesting lens suggesting the deep divide isn't just politics or economics, it's about who's actually in charge and what they value.
Right, it's almost like comparing two different operating systems. The sources frame it around the professional elites shaping each country.
So the main idea we're exploring today is China as, well, the engineering state. A nation obsessed with building big things super fast, led by technocrats, mostly engineers.
And then you have the U.S., painted as the lawyerly society, the elite here. Mostly lawyers, maybe financial analysts, focused on procedure, regulation, and honestly, often on blocking things.
Blocking everything, it seems sometimes, good and bad, right?
That's the potential downside, yeah. Its strength is obstruction, which can be protective, but also paralyzing.
And there's no better immediate example of this than looking at high-speed rail, is there? The contrast is just stark.
It really lays it bare. Okay, so the sources point to 2008. China starts building the Beijing-Shanghai high-speed line. That's about 800 miles.
Okay, and when did it open?
2011. 3 years flat.
Yeah.
Fully operational, cost around $36 billion, and it's now one of the busiest rail lines anywhere. That's the engineering state going full throttle.
3 years, $36 billion.
Yeah.
Right. Now let's look at the U.S. project that started the same year, 2008. California High-Speed Rail. Where are we now, 17 years later?
Well, 17 years on, not a single passenger has ridden it. They've managed to build just a small central piece. It connects a couple of cities in the Central Valley, but nowhere near San Francisco or L.A., the places originally intended.
Just a segment. And the cost. If China's entire 800-mile system was $36 billion, what's the forecast for California's partial line?
The latest number floating around is $128 billion.
$128 billion for a fraction of the line.
Yep. And what's really revealing, and speaks directly to the lawyerly society idea, is why. A huge chunk of the cost and delay comes down to politics. Politicians insisted the route be changed.
Changed how?
Well, deviating from the most direct, efficient path to add extra stops in their districts, even forcing it through an extra mountain range with tunnels purely for political gain.
So practical engineering, speed, efficiency, all sacrificed for procedure and local politics. That really says it all about priorities, doesn't it?
It does. The process trumped the outcome. And here's the kicker on speed. The official estimate for when just that small Central Valley segment might open, sometime between 2030 and 2033.
Wait, the margin of error is 3 years.
Exactly. That 3-year window of uncertainty is the exact same amount of time it took China to plan, build, and open their entire 800-mile system.
Wow. So one system is built for delivery, the other for managing competing interests, endlessly it seems.
That's the core contrast right there.
Okay, those rail numbers are pretty staggering. But to understand the why behind China's speed, and maybe their tolerance for, let's say, less citizen input, we need to look at who's been running the show.
Yeah, the sources really hammer this point. It's genuinely been ruled by engineers for decades now. And it wasn't an accident.
Right, this goes back to Deng Xiaoping after Mao.
Precisely. After the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, Deng deliberately elevated engineers. He wanted pragmatists, people trained in, heavy industry, hydraulics. People focused on solving tangible problems. Food, energy, infrastructure, not just political theory.
And this reached a peak around the early 2000s.
It really did. By 2002, the Politburo Standing Committee, the absolute top leadership, all 9 members had engineering degrees.
All 9.
Every single one. And these weren't just degrees on paper. The general secretary then, Hu Jintao, he studied hydraulic engineering, spent years actually building dams. They understood large-scale systems.
And Xi Jinping, the current leader, he's got a chemical engineering background himself. He kept this going.
He has, yeah, though maybe with a slight tweak. When he started his 3rd term in 2022, his Politburo saw a noticeable influx of executives from aerospace and weapons ministries.
Interesting. A shift towards high-tech and defense industries.
Seems like it. But the underlying principle is the same. The country should be led by people with proven experience managing huge, complex technical projects and, crucially, delivering physical results.
So if you put engineers in charge...
They build things.
Right. New public works become the answer to almost every problem. That seems to be the mantra.
It absolutely defined modern China. They figured out pretty quickly that while ideology might be shaky, transforming the physical landscape, visibly improving lives, that builds real legitimacy.
And the scale of what they've built since the reform started around 1980, it's almost hard to comprehend.
It really is. Give us some numbers.
Okay, since 1980, China's built a highway network twice the length of the entire U.S. interstate system.
Twice the length.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Their high-speed rail. It's now 20 times bigger than Japan's network, and Japan used to be the gold standard.
20 times.
And think about energy. They've installed almost as much solar and wind capacity as the rest of the world put together.
So they basically compressed a century of Western infrastructure development into, what, 4 decades?
Pretty much. And this physical transformation, it's not just impressive engineering. It's the bedrock of the Communist Party's legitimacy today, isn't it? Even with all the controls and repression.
Absolutely. It fueled that massive shift from farm to city, driving the manufacturing boom. But beyond the economics, just seeing the new roads, the reliable water, the modern buildings, that creates a powerful sense of national pride. It's tangible evidence that the government is making things better.
Now, to really see the engineering state in its, let's say, purest form, the sources suggest looking away from the big coastal cities like Shanghai. We need to go inland to the poorer regions, like Guizhou.
Guizhou is the perfect, almost extreme example. It's China's 4th poorest province. Household income there is like a 15th of New York State's. Tiny.
Historically known for being incredibly mountainous and difficult to get around in, right? Not 3 feet of land is flat, was the saying.
Exactly. A huge natural barrier to development. So what does the engineering state do when faced with mountains?
Build bridges. Lots and lots of bridges.
You got it. Guizhou now has 45 of the world's 100 highest bridges, just carved infrastructure through terrain that seemed impossible before.
And it's not just bridges, is it? Despite the poverty?
No, it's astounding. They have 5,000 miles of expressways. That's 3 times the highway length of New York State. A fully working high-speed rail network, 11 airports, with 3 more being built right now.
11 airports in one of the poorest provinces.
They literally engineered modernity onto the landscape. Build first, figure out the economics later seems to be the approach.
And they even tried to engineer specific industries there. I read about guitars.
Yeah, it's wild. Zion County, deep in Guizhou, was basically designated the guitar capital of the world. The state helped set it up, connected it with infrastructure, and now it makes something like 1 out of every 7 guitars sold globally.
So it's a completely top-down model. Build the physical shell roads, power, zones, then actively try to plant a specific industry there.
That's the playbook. Relentlessly focused on the supply side, on production.
Okay, the speed and scale are undeniable, but the sources immediately pivot to the other side of the coin, the appalling weaknesses, the authoritarian pulses. It seems like as living standards go up, so does the repression.
That's the disturbing paradox, isn't it? You have this incredibly dynamic entrepreneurial energy alongside an overwhelmingly powerful, often intrusive state.
The state moves fast, builds things.
And moves fast and breaks people. The technocratic mindset, the sources argue, views society almost like a fluid dynamics problem.
Like a hydraulic system.
Exactly. People, the economy, society, they're seen as flows to be managed, directed, restricted by turning the valves of state power. There's little room for individual messiness or dissent in that model.
Which allows for those lightning-fast decisions, but also means when they get it wrong.
They get it spectacularly wrong. Speaking of Guizhou's amazing infrastructure, that brings us to the debt, right?
Ah, yes. The downside of build it and they will come.
Immense debt. The sources mention places like Panshui City in Guizhou racking up $21 billion in debt for projects that were basically, well, vanity projects.
Like ski slopes in southern China.
Artificial ski slopes, yeah. Things that never really generated the expected tourism or returns. It shows the risk when the focus is purely on the act of building the engineering feat itself, rather than long-term economic sense or accountability.
But maybe the most chilling example of this social engineering impulse, treating the population like numbers on a spreadsheet, is the one-child policy.
Oh, absolutely. That policy is a direct product of the engineering state's mindset. It wasn't driven by communist ideology so much as this faith in misbegotten scientism, as one source puts it.
A belief that society could be mathematically optimized. Where did that come from?
The sources trace it back to a specific individual, a missile scientist named Song Jin.
A missile scientist dictating population policy. How did that happen?
Well, Songjin had studied cybernetics, systems analysis, probably in the Soviet Union. He took these rigid mathematical models, the kind used for calculating missile trajectories,
Okay.
and applied them to China's population. He ran computer models and concluded that the optimal population for China was no more than 700 million.
Optimal based on what? Resources.
Based on his models, he apparently presented the leadership, Deng included, with precise graphs assuring them they could control population growth with the same mathematical certainty as guiding a missile to its target.
And they bought it. That scientific certainty must have been appealing after the chaos of Mao.
Totally. It offered a seemingly precise technical fix to a huge, complex social challenge. So they went for the most extreme version one child because it was simple, measurable, and looked mathematically sound on paper.
But the reality of enforcing it?
Matured into what the sources call a campaign of rural terror.
The enforcement methods were just brutal, weren't they?
Agonizingly so. Local officials were under insane pressure to meet birth quotas. So you had constant harassment, families visited hundreds of times, huge fines. They collected something like $200 billion in fines over the policy's lifetime.
200 billion.
But the physical coercion was horrific. Forced sterilizations, often done crudely, late-term forced abortions, sometimes without anesthetic.
The descriptions are hard to read.
They really are. Reports of doctors using formaldehyde injections or even crushing skulls in late-term abortions. One source described women being trussed, handcuffed, herded into hog cages, and delivered by the truckload to the operating table.
Fog cages. It's like they weren't seen as human.
The comparison made at the time was that the state treated its citizens like farmers treated livestock. Just complete dehumanization in pursuit of a numerical target.
And the legacy is still being felt today, right? Skewed demographics, aging population.
Massive problems. A looming demographic cliff, a rapidly aging society with not enough young people to support them, and that horrific gender imbalance at its peak. It was like 120 boys born for every 100 girls because of female infanticide or sex-selective abortions.
And the cruelest irony.
The policy probably wasn't even necessary. Fertility rates were already falling dramatically due to natural modernization before the policy really bit hard. They plunged from 6.0 children per woman in 1970 down to 2.7 by 1980.
So the engineering state inflicted all that suffering based on flawed models overriding natural trends.
Precisely. And that same impulse, prioritizing state control over individual well-being, trusting the plan over reality, and we saw it again with zero COVID, didn't we?
Absolutely. That felt like the ultimate expression of the engineering state philosophy applied to public health.
Total control to achieve a specific outcome, zero transmission, no matter the human cost. They clung to it for almost 3 years, long after it stopped making sense, driving the country into broad misery, as one source put it.
The Shanghai lockdown stands out. 25 million people locked down instantly.
And it just showed the limits of top-down control, even with all their tech. Logistics completely collapsed, food rotted because the local committees, often just elderly volunteers, couldn't manage the complex digital delivery systems.
And the testing itself became a problem.
Ironically, yes. The constant mandatory mass testing forced millions of people into crowded elevators and testing lines every single day, likely spreading the virus rather than containing it.
And then there was the twisted logic around things like medicine.
Oh, that was deeply revealing of the state's mindset. Remember the policy of separating COVID-positive children, even babies, from their parents? That only stopped after a huge international outcry. But the thing that really showed their fear of losing control was blocking access to basic fever reducers. For 3 years, you basically couldn't buy ibuprofen or Advil.
Why?
Because they were terrified people would use it to hide a fever and avoid detection. So when they finally abruptly dropped all restrictions in the winter of 2022, the entire population was caught completely unprepared, unprotected, and couldn't even get basic medicine to manage the symptoms. Just callous disregard.
Okay, so if the engineer defines China's system, the lawyer is central to America's. Let's shift gears to the lawyerly society.
Yeah, the influence of lawyers in the U.S. is, well, it's historic. Tocqueville noticed it way back in the 1830s, calling them the American aristocracy.
Aristocracy.
Because their skills, arguing, interpreting rules, navigating complex procedures, made them kind of natural generalists in a society built on law. And that influence has only grown. Lawyers have arguably pushed out economists, scientists, others from top policy roles.
Leading to what the sources term democracy by lawsuit, where big societal issues get fought out in court instead of, say, through elections or regulation.
Exactly. And that feeds directly into what the sources see as the core problem, this elevation of process over outcomes.
meaning how you do something becomes more important than whether you actually achieve the goal.
Pretty much. For the Lawyerly Society, the absolute priority is checking every single procedural box, commissioning every study, allowing every possible legal challenge to be heard. That meticulous process becomes the substitute for actually getting the thing done.
Can you give some examples of these procedures that create the gridlock?
Well, think about environmental reviews or planning permissions. Agencies often have to conduct, every conceivable study before anything can happen. They have to document the ventilation of options, hold endless stakeholder meetings.
All while knowing that any tiny slip-up could trigger a lawsuit.
That's the constant threat. Judicial review looms over everything. The whole system is designed with the primary goal of avoiding future litigation. But perfecting the process to that degree is basically impossible and takes forever.
So fundamentally, the system gives lawyers, or anyone who can hire them, way more power to stop things than to start or build things.
That's the crux of it. If you want to build a wind farm or high-speed rail or even just improve a bus route, you face this minefield of potential legal challenges. Failure to perfectly assess, say, the impact on one specific subspecies under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA.
Can bring the whole multi-billion-dollar project crashing down.
Right. The legal costs and, crucially, the time delays become weapons. They're used to protect existing interests in NIMBYism, or sometimes, ironically, even to block projects designed for the public good.
The Cape Wind project off Massachusetts seems like a textbook case of this. Blocking green energy, no less.
Oh, Cape Wind is brutal. A developer spent 16 years trying to build the country's first major offshore wind farm.
16 years. What happened?
Wealthy residents on Cape Cod, including prominent liberal families like the Kennedys, basically hired lawyers and funded nonprofits to fight it tooth and nail. They used every procedural tool available: environmental concerns, navigation rights, aesthetic objections.
So it wasn't that they were against wind power generally.
No, they just didn't want to see the turbines from their multi-million-dollar homes. After a decade and a half of legal warfare, permits lapsed, funding collapsed, the project died.
0 megawatts generated after 16 years of process.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates how the Lawyerly Society can protect the interests of the wealthy and connected, even at the expense of crucial national goals like decarbonization or building necessary infrastructure.
And this contributes to that feeling of physical stagnation, right?
Yeah.
While China's been transforming its landscape, America feels stuck in some ways. You see it starkly in places like the Bay Area.
The Bay Area is such a paradox, isn't it? It's the global epicenter of digital innovation, trillions in corporate value. Yet it's surrounded by failing infrastructure, homelessness crises, unreliable public transport, power grids that can't cope.
We create amazing software, but struggle to build the physical world around it.
It's a bizarre disconnect, and it's a huge change from the mid-20th century America.
That's a key point in the sources. The U.S. used to be an engineering state, didn't it? Eisenhower's interstate highway system, the Apollo program, the big dams.
Absolutely monumental engineering feats. That building boom really defined the post-war era.
So when did that change? Why did America lose that building mojo?
The sources point to a major shift starting in the late 1960s, early 70s. There was a growing public backlash against what was seen as technocratic arrogance.
Arrogance how?
People got fed up with urban planners, often seen as unaccountable experts, ramming highways through vibrant neighborhoods, often minority communities. There were major environmental disasters linked to unchecked industrial development, and a general distrust of the secretive, powerful defense establishment running the Cold War.
And one book really captured and amplified that feeling, didn't it? Robert Caro's biography of Robert Moses, the power broker.
That book was a landmark. It meticulously detailed how Moses, New York's master builder, wielded immense unchecked power, displaced hundreds of thousands of people, and often acted with disdain for communities or democratic process.
It became a cautionary tale.
It became the Bible for distrusting big projects and powerful builders. It fundamentally taught Americans to fear and loathe engineers and centralized planning. The pendulum swung hard the other way.
So in trying to prevent the next Robert Moses, we ended up creating a system that makes it incredibly difficult, slow, and expensive to build anything big, even things we desperately need.
That's the trap the Lawyerly Society sought to be in. It's optimized for caution, for containment, for process, not for decisive action or construction.
Okay, so fast forward to today. This competition between the engineering state and the Lawyerly Society is playing out intensely in manufacturing and technology. And China's edge isn't just those top-level engineers. It's something deeper The source is called process knowledge.
Yeah, process knowledge is crucial. It's not stuff you learn from a textbook or a blueprint. It's that hands-on, practical, often unwritten expertise you gain from actually doing things, running a complex assembly line, refining a production technique, managing a massive supply chain.
It's the know-how.
Exactly. And the story of Shenzhen is the story of how China systematically acquired that know-how, often by partnering with Western companies initially.
Shenzhen's transformation is legendary. From a sleepy fishing village to the world's electronics factory in, what, a few decades?
It was deliberate policy. Companies like Apple decided to mass produce iPhones there using giant contract manufacturers like Foxconn. For Apple, it meant incredible efficiency and scale.
Good for shareholders.
Right. But for China, it was a masterclass. They got millions of workers trained every year in sophisticated manufacturing techniques. They learned how to manage these incredibly complex, high-volume operations.
And the sources track how China's role evolved, saying the iPhone supply chain got more red over time.
That's a key indicator. It means China went from just doing the final, relatively low-value assembly, which was maybe 4% of the iPhone's value back in 2007, to making much more valuable, complex components themselves. Things like high-precision screens, camera lenses, sophisticated chips. By the iPhone X in 2017, their share of the value was up to around 25%.
So they climbed the value chain, absorbing that process knowledge.
Rapidly. And today, the magic of Shenzhen isn't just cheap labor anymore, it's the whole ecosystem.
What does that ecosystem look like?
You've got probably the world's highest concentration of creative hardware engineers. But crucially, you have this unbelievable density of suppliers and components readily available. The sources talk about the Huakangbai market.
The giant electronics market.
Yeah, it's like nowhere else. You can walk in and find virtually any component you need, often cutting-edge stuff, wholesale. It's called the peace dividends of the smartphone wars. All these advanced components developed for phones are now available for other products.
So talent, components, and skilled labor all clustered together.
Exactly. And that fertile ground allowed new giants to spring up incredibly fast. Think BYD, now the world's biggest electric vehicle maker, or DJI, totally dominant in drones. They grew out of that Shenzhen ecosystem.
Okay, contrast that with the U.S. experience over the same period. We were actively offshoring manufacturing, shedding that process knowledge.
Yeah, the elite consensus in the U.S., especially in the 90s and 2000s, seemed to be that manufacturing didn't really matter strategically. Remember that infamous quip, computer chips, potato chips, what's the difference?
Right. The idea was manufacturing is low value, let someone else do it, we'll focus on design and finance.
And that led directly to the hollowing out. U.S. manufacturing employment dropped from around 17 million in 2000 to maybe 13 million now. A huge loss of capacity and skills.
And we're seeing the results of that atrophy now, aren't we? Even in iconic American companies.
Absolutely. Look at Boeing's recent struggles. The 737 AX disasters, the production delays, many analysts trace that back to a cultural shift away from engineering excellence toward short-term financial targets, leading to outsourcing and quality control failures.
And Intel, too, once the undisputed chip king.
Yeah, Intel fell behind. They struggled for years to get their next-generation chip manufacturing processes working, losing ground to competitors in Asia like TSMC. It points to a loss of that cutting-edge process knowledge and fabrication.
And this weakness extends even to the defense industrial base, which you'd think would be protected.
That's genuinely alarming. The war in Ukraine exposed it starkly. The U.S. burned through its stockpiles of certain crucial munitions, like artillery shells, in just months. It showed our production capacity is way lower than what's needed for a sustained conflict.
And major weapons systems face delays.
Huge delays and cost overruns. Fighter jets, new Navy ships. The industrial base often lacks the skilled workforce, the specialized suppliers, the sheer capacity to deliver on time and on budget anymore. That process knowledge has faded.
And the sources argue that financialization made this worse. The focus on Wall Street returns.
Definitely. Finance tends to favor capital-light businesses, software platforms, financial services, things that don't require massive upfront investment in factories and machines.
Which makes building physical things harder to fund.
Exactly. Manufacturing is capital-intensive. It takes time to pay off. Investors focused on quarterly earnings often shy away from it. The sources mention how hard it was for companies like Tesla, determined to lead in manufacturing, to raise money initially. It was excruciating, apparently, because it went against the grain of what Wall Street wanted.
Meanwhile, China's not just building capacity. They have this whole ideology driving at the industrial party.
Yeah, it's this sort of semi-official mindset or intellectual current. It basically says that global competition is ruthless, and the decisive factor is scientific and technological power, especially in manufacturing.
So it's a very materialist, techno-nationalist view.
Very much so. It demands total national mobilization towards industrial strength and technological dominance. Things like liberal democracy or individual rights are often dismissed as sentimental distractions from the real strategic imperative, which is production power.
And you even see this reflected in things like popular science fiction, like the three-body problem.
That's a great example. Lou Cixin's trilogy is hugely popular in China and globally now, and a core theme is that scientists and engineers are the ones who have to make the really tough, brutal, utilitarian decisions to save humanity.
Sacrificing millions for the species.
Right. It culturally reinforces that technocratic idea that experts making hard choices, sometimes overriding individual concerns, is necessary for collective survival. It mirrors the engineering state's willingness to trade rights for engineered outcomes.
And history shows that autocratic states can achieve major technological breakthroughs, right? It's not like science only thrives in democracies.
Not at all. Think about 19th century Prussia pioneering chemicals, Nazi Germany in rocketry, the Soviet Union in the space race.
What's the common factor there?
Usually it's the state pouring massive focused resources into specific goals, demanding results, and cutting through the kind of bureaucratic red tape or legal challenges you see in the lawyerly society. Autocracy can provide intense focus and funding, even amidst terrible repression. China seems to be using that playbook today. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So pulling this all together, this deep dive really highlights two fundamentally different ways of running a country, doesn't it? The U.S. and China aren't just competing, they're offering competing models for governance in the 21st century.
Yeah, and the competition is really going to shape the international order. Each system has its strengths, but also its critical weaknesses, its pathologies.
For the U.S., the lawyerly society, the big struggle seems to be, well, just getting things done. Ineffectualness, right? Trapped in process.
Exactly, caught in a web of procedures and legal challenges that often leads to paralysis. While China, the engineering state, its Achilles heel, seems to be the state itself, its deep distrust of its own people.
How does that limit them?
That control impulse, that fear of decentralization and genuine openness, ultimately stifles the bottom-up creativity and innovation you need for truly sustainable long-term progress. It's self-limiting.
But looking at the raw strategic picture, especially if things turn hostile, that engineering state advantage looks pretty formidable, doesn't it? Comes down to hardware versus software.
It really does. The U.S. has huge advantages, alliances, digital innovation, financial markets, but China has this massive, undeniable advantage. It can build physical things incredibly fast and at incredible scale.
And in a real crisis, a war, another pandemic, maybe the climate emergency, that raw production capacity could be decisive, couldn't it? More than financial power.
You'd think so. The numbers are just stark. One source mentioned in 2022, China had nearly 1,800 ships under construction, the U.S. 5.
1,800 versus 5.
And projections suggest China might have something like 45% of the world's total industrial capacity by 2030. That kind of hardware advantage, that ability to churn out material, could potentially overwhelm everyone else combined in a prolonged struggle.
So the path forward seems clear, if difficult. For the U.S., it's about rediscovering how to build again, right? Cutting through the process obsession, focusing on the supply side housing, infrastructure, manufacturing, to fix real problems and regain public trust.
Definitely. Recovering that ethos of building. And for China, maybe the challenge is learning to build less or at least smarter.
Dealing with that massive debt from potentially wasteful projects.
Exactly. The empty China's Manhattan in Tianjin, those $21 billion vanity projects in Guizhou, they need to shift from just pure quantity of construction towards projects with real economic value, addressing the social costs, maybe allowing more genuine quality of life focus rather than just mega projects.
So you have the engineering state, prioritizing sheer production capacity, willing to tolerate inefficiency for the sake of scale and resilience.
Versus the lawyerly society, prioritizing meticulous procedure, financial stability, protecting existing wealth and interests.
Which leads us to the final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given where the world seems to be heading, more tension, more crises, maybe more conflict, which approach is ultimately better suited for national survival and prosperity in this century?
Is it the overwhelming hardware capacity of the builders, even if it's sometimes brittle or inefficient? Or is it the careful procedure and financial strength of the lawyers, even if it sometimes leads to stagnation? It's a fundamental question about what matters most.
Something to definitely chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.